Every part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has its own strengths and weaknesses, and I feel like each has merit and reasons why someone might enjoy it over others. In fact, this was a message that I really tried to convey during one of my previous videos in which I ranked every single part, but tried to praise each one for everything that it did right. Sorry if I didn't do a very good job with part 1 though. After reading the incredible first few chapters of the JoJo lands, which have been coming out pretty recently, today I'm going to talk about why I think Part 8, Jojolion, has the absolute perfect opening for a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure part. Specifically, I'll be focusing on the very first volume in this video. Now, in the aforementioned ranking video, I did have a fair amount of criticism for this part's middle section. However, I've always loved the opening, and from my very first read through, I thought it was the best opening to any JoJo part. The opening volume draws readers right into the story and this alternate, almost twisted version of Morio, and sets up the mystery and intrigue of an entirely new JoJo storyline so perfectly that any reader would be hard-pressed not to continue with the story after this volume's conclusion. I think it's fair to say that that is the ultimate goal of most stories' introductions. In this video, I'll try to guide you through the events of this volume chronologically, and I'll be paying close attention to the character introductions, the mysteries introduced along with the setup for upcoming events, the completely new atmosphere that this part brings to the JoJo universe, and of course the introduction of Jojolion stands and the first stand battle that we see take place in part 8. I will be trying to avoid spoilers where possible so that anyone who wants to get into Jojolion can use this video to judge whether the series is for them or not. However, I will be mentioning when something is significant to the larger plot of the part. But before we get into the video, I have a pop quiz for you all. In this iconic panel from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, what is Yasuho so appalled by? Of course, the correct answer is that you have not hit the like and subscribe buttons yet. If you want Yasuho to look at you the way that she looks at certain parts of Gappy, then I would recommend that you do so right now. So we start off Jojolion from the perspective of Yasuho Hirose, and she's hiding from some creep named Joshu Higashikata. Those names immediately sound familiar, of course, and anyone who has read Steel Ball Run will realize that this part will contain a healthy dose of references to Diamond is Unbreakable. It's kinda cool that Yasuho is the narrator of this part, at least at the most crucial sections, and that she gives us a lot of background information on this alternate universe version of Morio. But this isn't anything new for JoJo. The only previous part I remember starting from the main character's point of view would be part 6, I guess, and it kind of helps us identify with side characters if their POV is the first thing that introduces us to the story. We learn a bit about Morio, but Yasuho mostly seems to focus on the wall eyes where she's located at the moment. These are mysterious protuberances, as she describes them, which emerged from the ground in Morio shortly after a devastating earthquake and tsunami that struck Japan. Of course, this happened on the same date as the real-life 2011 tsunami in Japan, and that makes the setting and situation immediately strike a chord with anyone who remembers that event. This relation to real life also gives the walleyes an additional eerie quality. How are they related to the tsunami, and how will this seemingly natural occurrence shape the plot going forward? We don't get much time to ponder this though, because there's a naked guy coming out of the ground. Maybe this should be expected now that we know a bit more about the walleyes and how strange they seem to be, but this guy is still a complete mystery to us, and to Yasuho as well. He doesn't really seem to know what he's doing there and isn't communicating with Yasuho much, yet we immediately know that he has to be related to Johnny Joestar due to the star birthmark on his left shoulder. Now, this story takes place more than 100 years after Steel Ball Run finishes, so we have no idea what this relation actually is, and we also have no clue why there seem to be bite marks around his birthmark. So Yasuho has no idea who this guy is, but she tries to help him out despite being a bit hesitant at first. She notices the bite mark and can tell that he's pretty out of it and calls 911, or whatever the equivalent is in Japan. Eventually, we see the man from the ground question Yasuho and try to determine his own identity and why he's in this precarious situation. But he's clearly incapable of moving around yet as he flops back down into the puddle he's stuck in. Yasuho pulls him out after a struggle and is faced with two new mysteries. First, a picture that she took of the man's birthmark shows a transparent bubble, which also features the birthmark. More importantly, she's completely shocked when looking at the man's crotch. Now, at first, I just thought bro was packing, but I was wrong. He's got 4 balls. This is great foreshadowing, I guess. I don't know, maybe Araki just thought it was funny, then he made something out of it later. The man from the ground is seemingly out cold when Joshu finally appears. Bro is horny, and he appears to be absolutely devastated after seeing Yasuo fraternizing and lying with a naked stranger. Joshu is really brutal and inconsolable right out of the gate, hitting Yasuo to the ground and attempting to kill Mr. Groundhog over here with a rock he finds nearby. Our new Jojo is way too powerful though, and demonstrates his apparent stand ability when fist fighting doesn't seem to be working, taking away Joshu's eyesight in one of the more shocking panels I can remember from all of JoJo. Of course, Joshu is helpless without vision, but he seems to regain his eyes as soon as the mysterious man knocks him out. This first confrontation is pretty intense and brutal, as Joshu really tries to kill the new Jojo in the first chapter of part 8, and even says he'll kill himself afterwards. At the same time, this mysterious new Jojo seems really brutal himself, stripping Joshu of his sight with, again, a very shocking visual. After the fight, Yasuo is left distressed and at a loss for words after the man from the ground passes out, and continues to provide narration as the first chapter ends. She mentions that this story will be about breaking a curse, in the same way that Johnny Joestar stated part 7 would be a story about learning to walk. Yasuo's narration here really just continues to set up the rest of the plot. What curse will be broken in Jojolion? Who is the man lying on the ground in front of her? And what sort of mysteries do the wall eyes truly hold? Chapter 2 starts out with our new Jojo waking up in the hospital and thinking about his complete cluelessness regarding his current situation as well as his own past. We see that he understands a lot of basic things or facts about the world around him, but at the same time he doesn't seem to understand people like nurses or even a family of 3 who walk by. Yasuo comes to visit him, although she says she came just to visit Joshu and is just stopping by, and we get to see all of his quirks come through during their interactions. Most notably, she finds him sleeping under the mattress because he enjoys the compression. Yasuo's conversation with this Jojo just shows how great their chemistry is right away, and also helps to continue to establish both of them as characters. So I figured this would be a good time to talk about these characters in depth. Jojolion's protagonist was nicknamed Gappy by the fanbase due to the space between his front teeth, and I'll use that name during this video as he doesn't get an official name in the first volume. While Gappy is clearly very eccentric and his interactions with others can be hilarious due to him not knowing much about cultural norms, I don't think that's what makes him stand out right away. Rather, it's that he's the only Jojo we've met so far who doesn't seem to have a strong identity from the start. In fact, he has no identity. Contrast this with someone like Giorno or Joseph, who both have very strong personalities which are established right away. With Gappy, we don't know how he's going to develop or change over time, and his goal is the same as the audience's really, to discover who he is and how he came to be where he is now. Gappy is a blank canvas, and that's what's so exciting about the beginning of Jojolion. Araki had the chance to do anything imaginable with his character development, and that prospect is so refreshing. Don't get me wrong, I think other Jojos like Johnny and Jolene, for example, had a lot of character development by the end of their respective arcs, but the idea of the protagonist developing after starting as a complete mystery to the audience is way more extreme than those cases. Throughout Jojolion, we'll see Gappy really struggle with his identity and the past, and it's very powerful to see that struggle begin right at the start. We get to see Gappy's quirks come through in his second interaction with Yasuo. He does stuff like measuring everything by sight, including her chest, or letting the cream from the mochi he eats spray out of his mouth. It comes off as comedic in nature here and really helps to establish their chemistry and why Yasuo might view Gappy as a love interest, as it's pretty obvious that this is what Araki is pushing from the beginning. From Gappy's side of things, we understand that Yasuo is the first person he can remember meeting, and we'll see her attempt to help him regain whatever lost memories or identity he might have. So he's obviously extremely grateful to her for those things. And he shows her physically, it seems, which again demonstrates that he doesn't really understand social norms yet. It's a nice change of pace to actually have a romantic interest for the main Jojo. Of course, Jonathan had Erina, but other than that, there isn't a romantic interest for any other Jojo for the entirety of their own part. I guess Jolene has Onasui, but that one is a little weird sometimes, so it doesn't really feel like the same situation as here. Yasuo is great for establishing the most important and unique aspect aspects of Jojolion, like the romance and also the more mature tone of this story. Later on, she definitely gets a lot more development as a character, and I really enjoyed seeing her pop up throughout the series, but at this point, I feel like she mainly drives the plot forward while also playing the straight man and reacting to Gappy's outlandish behavior. She says she knows what shop Gappy's sailor hat was purchased from, and this looks like the first clue in discovering his true identity. It seems that it'll be difficult to leave the hospital as the police are a bit upset with Gappy for beating up Jojo, but Gappy uses his mysterious stand ability once again, this time to drain the water from a detective's body as a way to divert her attention, as this causes her to become incredibly dehydrated. This panel of the detective was another one that was pretty shocking during my first read through, and it honestly looks like something that Junji Ito would have had a great time drawing. And of course, as the pair leaves the hospital, we see a bitter Jojo watching from his room above. It seems that he has the same sort of bite mark that Gappy had in the previous chapter, and he also has a fever. Maybe this suggests that Jojo will obtain a stand ability, however this isn't really certain since we don't know if Gappy has his stand due to the walleyes. We simply don't know anything about him. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I hate Jojo, and I know I'm not alone in that. I didn't really enjoy the majority of the times that he was on screen or on page, I guess, and that started right from the beginning. I think there are good arcs that he plays a prominent role in which come up later in the story, but I'm honestly just glad he isn't really a main character or anything. I know that's not a very positive take for a video on why this opening is perfect, but I don't think Jojo being unlikable is necessarily a problem at this point. He plays his antagonistic role well, and his future role in the story is foreshadowed with his bite mark and his obsession with these two. After this scene, we see Gappy and Yasuo arrive at the SBR store, which is a pretty early reference to the previous part. Yasuo asks the shop owner who could have bought Gappy's sailor hat, and the man says that 3 days ago, Gappy came to the store and bought the hat himself. With Yasuo trying to pry further into Gappy's true identity, we get the first real plot twist in the story. The store's owner identifies Gappy as Yoshikage Kira. Given that the story takes place in an alternate version of Morio, it would make complete sense for Kira to be mentioned at some point or even appear, but the main character being Kira was probably not something anyone expected, considering Part 7's Jojo shared his name with Jonathan from Phantom Blood. Gappy and Yasuo seem relatively content with this revelation though, and Yasuo is able to get an address for this Yoshikage Kira. Yasuo is a bit disappointed though and reveals she thinks Gappy looks a lot more like Josuke, sharing that that was the name of her old pet dog. I'm not really sure if that's supposed to be a compliment or not, but now we've gotten our first official reference to the original Jojo from Morio. After a brief search for Kira's apartment key, once again showing off the strong chemistry between Gappy and Yasuo, we finally get to see inside the apartment. Now, at this point, it really seems like Kira has a lot in common with his Part 4 counterpart, most notably the hands scattered around the room and the Mona Lisa replica hanging on one wall. The apartment is incredibly organized, but in a somewhat bizarre way, with 3 sailor uniforms hanging right at the front entrance and a huge collection of peas sitting in one of the kitchen cabinets. I don't remember Part 4 Kira being obsessed with peas, but maybe he was, I don't know. Yasuo is even more convinced that Gappy is Kira after holding one of the sailor uniforms up to his body and verifying that the size matches him, and at this point I can't really blame her. I mean, Gappy has had one of Kira's hats on since he emerged from the ground, and they're clearly both quirky and peculiar individuals. Suddenly, the two hear a noise coming from down the hall, in Kira's bathroom. After hitting a classic Jojo pose, Gappy makes his way down the hall and he hears a noise coming from the apartment upstairs. It seems like someone might be running around up there, although we can't really tell why that would be the case. I really loved reading through this whole section a second time for this video, since any sort of mysterious setup like this really lends itself to a reread. Even something small like these footsteps can seem insignificant at first, but Araki is showing off exactly how great he is at building up suspense and tension before the most climactic moments in his stories. Anyways, Gappy finally enters the washroom only to find a naked woman? Okay, I did not expect full frontal nudity in JoJo, but I guess that's what happens when you're trying to cater to an older audience. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining from a reading perspective, but I am a bit annoyed that I have to censor panels to put them in this video. What also adds to the more adult feel of this part is how clueless and shell-shocked this woman seems to be. Yasuo tries to ask her why she's there and whether she knows Gappy or not, but the woman just stares blankly before approaching, begging begging for help. It's really creepy to see that she's terrified to this degree, especially because we have no clue why that's the case. Suddenly, a glass shatters on the floor and we see that this mysterious lady is instantly stunned. Again, we still have no idea why. Gappy tries putting on some nearby slippers for protection, but he is cut by a trap inside of them. We then see that the glass that dropped earlier was filled with fingernails, being one jar in a whole collection. Who would rig their slippers to cut feet, and who would collect fingernails like this? During the search of this room, Yasuo finds a photo album. When Gappy moves closer in order to look through the album with her, she screams and begins to run off. With tears in her eyes, she openly regrets ever trusting Gappy before leaving. After that, Gappy finally gets to look in the photo album and is instantly disturbed. It looks like he's been doing S&M photo shoots with the bathtub lady, but Gappy is adamant that he's never met her before. It is really interesting that this photo album, as well as his true identity possibly being Kira, does seem to point toward Gappy being some sort of villain in this world, at least before he lost all of his memories. Once again, the blank canvas approach to this character means quite literally anything is possible, and we as readers can let our imaginations run completely wild. Gappy has a lot less time to ponder these sorts of things than I do though, as he falls to the floor while interrogating the naked lady and cuts open one of his hands. We see that a strange symbol has appeared where both of Gappy's cuts were, and that these symbols have already formed on all four of the bathtub lady's limbs. It looks like Gappy temporarily loses control over the foot that has had a symbol placed on it, and he begins to realize that the entire room is rigged to cut people who enter, as he can't even touch a towel without risking being hurt by it. As the lady slowly explains more and more about the situation that they're in, it becomes clear. The first stand battle of Jojolion started the moment Gappy entered this apartment. Strangely, this stand battle doesn't actually start with Gappy being attacked. Instead, the woman from the tub gets back in and slowly starts submerging herself until eventually she's completely underwater. Now, Gappy's a little stupid, but eventually he realizes she's actually drowning and tries to pull her out to no avail. He then starts choking himself with his marked left hand, and it becomes pretty obvious that the enemy's stand ability allows them to freely control these marked limbs. Gappy's able to pull out the drain stopper, and although this ends up saving the woman's life, it backfires since the chain, sharpened to be like a razor, ends up cutting Gappy's previously unmarked hand. The woman finally starts explaining things clearly, and she confirms that being wounded is what causes these symbols to form, and that the enemy is able to control these limbs when they are standing directly above their target. Despite Gappy's questions after this revelation, he isn't able to get much of an answer, as the enemy upstairs suddenly tries to make the woman cut out her own tongue with a razor. While Gappy is able to save her again, the woman makes it clear that she is just bait and that he is the real target of these attacks. Gappy's foot is almost cut by his limbs that are being manipulated, and he quickly realizes that now is the time to send out another one of his bubbles. It pops just as it touches the wall behind him, and Gappy's stand, Soft and Wet, finally emerges in its first full reveal. Soft and Wet soap bubbles can steal something from a person or object after touching it and popping, and this bubble has stolen the sound from the wall it touched. Even though we see the stand completely destroy this wall, we know from Gappy's explanation that not a single bit of noise was produced from this action. Okay, come on, just imagine how incredibly cool this will be if there's an anime adaptation for this part. Being able to play with the sound elements would make this scene even more perfect than it already is. Now, I just have to say that this is one of my favorite stand fights in all of JoJo, and it's probably the main reason why I feel like this opening is just so perfect. Everything, the setup of the room, the slowly building tension, the woman being used as bait, the reveal of Soft and Wet, it's all so well done. I feel like this introduces how stands will function in part 8 really well. There are a lot of conditions and limitations that stand users will end up having to be aware of throughout their fights, and so it's really not just about who is stronger, but more about who is able to satisfy these conditions while simultaneously fending off the other's attacks. Of course, stand battles have always been about outwitting your opponent, but having clearly defined limitations like needing to be directly above your target in order to control them creates even more possibilities for traps and outsmarting the opponent. The whole concept of this opposing stand also plays into the mystery and buildup of this section, since remaining hidden on the floor above is how the stand even has any power over Gappy in the first place. While his opponent has seemingly had all the time in the world to prepare this bathroom to his complete advantage, Gappy has had to think on the spot and pull off some sort of escape attempt, demonstrating that even without his memories, he knows how to apply his stand ability to the tough toughest of situations. This is a really intense atmosphere that fits well with everything that has been built up so far, and it's really exciting to see Gappy outsmart his opponent for a bit, even though the situation felt so dark and helpless for a time. I find it really interesting too how this fight in Kira's apartment imitates Josuke and Kira's final fight from Diamond is Unbreakable, as this is another fight where the combatants have to engage each other from a distance and rely on things other than sight to defeat each other. This comparison feels even more on the nose when we learn that Gappy believes the person upstairs is the real Yoshikage Kira. I also think the lady in the bathtub is a great addition to this fight. Her inability to communicate at first is just so frustrating, yet builds so much tension at the same time by keeping us in the dark. She's the perfect bait for Gappy, and we know that he can't just leave her to be killed even though it's obviously a trap. This lady adds a ton of drama to the fight, and she continues to add to the subtle horror elements we've been seeing throughout the volume so far. And it's really interesting to see an enemy start off the fight by attacking a bystander rather than going after our protagonist right away. And let's not forget how iconic the introduction of Soft and Wet is. I mean, come on, this has to be one of the most amazing JoJo poses in the whole series. And silencing the wall plus the shh from Gappy is simply epic. I don't know how else to describe it. This has to be one of the best stand intros in the entire series. Getting back to the story, after breaking through the wall, Gappy goes dashing, and it seems like the attacker upstairs still has no idea where he is. He figures going out to the veranda would be a little less obvious than leaving through the front door, but this ends up being a trap. Now, personally, the handsaw sitting right in front of the door would have set off some alarm bells in my head, but clearly I'm built different. Gappy comes across two snakes immediately after breaking through the glass silently, and it becomes pretty clear that he's screwed. He gets bitten, but we see that the wound doesn't turn into a symbol since the attacker isn't actually aware of Gappy's location. I really love that this additional limitation was placed on the opponent's stand, since it adds another layer to the latter half of this fight and demonstrates another reason why it was so crucial for Gappy to take away the attacker's ability to hear what he was doing earlier. As Gappy's trying to figure out what to do, we see that his opponent is dangling a snake down towards the balcony he's on, and we can see how far in advance he's actually prepared for this fight. Of course, these snakes are poisonous and Gappy literally starts to die, although don't worry, since this naturally won't impact his ability to fight whatsoever. As he starts to head back inside Kira's apartment, Gappy finally sees that the saw had the words "Why not cut it off" printed on it, daring him to cut off his own leg. We get another really interesting parallel to part 4 in this moment, as we see that he's unable to steal the poison from his own body, in the same way that Crazy Diamond couldn't heal any of Josuke's own wounds. Suddenly, Gappy has a flashback of a certain man, and this is great foreshadowing that will definitely be thoroughly followed up on in future chapters and surely won't create any plot inconsistencies. So anyways, Gappy's hiding inside when the naked lady appears once again. She finally decides to be useful, and she calls the dude upstairs so that he knows exactly where Gappy is. It seems like she's just traumatized and wants to get out of this situation as fast as possible, but damn, dude, she has been so unhelpful for the last 3 chapters, it's crazy. Also, I love how committed this opponent is. Dude memorized Kira's entire apartment so thoroughly that he knows exactly where Gappy is the second this lady tells him. Of course, this means that Gappy's snake bite turns into a symbol and he gets tossed around the apartment like a rag doll. The lady tells him how this is all his fault while he gets smashed into the TV and starts raising the saw to his own mouth. Rose is having an all-around terrible day. Just when it looks like Gappy's about to get really hurt, Yasuo walks back into the apartment. She had a bit of a change of heart at the start of the last chapter, and I guess this predicament makes it pretty obvious that someone is out to get Gappy. Gappy yells at her to run away, but this is an action manga, so she just stands there and waits to get killed. She's almost hurt by the saw in Gappy's hand, but he's finally come up with a plan that will save them both. Yet another soap bubble emerges from his shoulder and it ends up popping on the apartment ceiling. We hear someone slipping and then Gappy reveals what has happened. He stole the friction from the floor above them, causing the attacker to be unable to stand or grip anything at all. This was probably Gappy's most iconic use of his soap bubbles for a long time, and maybe it still is. I think it's just a really cool application of this stand, especially for this situation in particular. Gappy is convinced that the person upstairs is none other than Yoshikage Kira himself, himself and is determined to drag them out and fight them face to face. Gappy slides towards the veranda along with his opponent as he's still being controlled, and they stop right at the shattered glass door. This synchronization backfires on Gappy's attacker though, as Gappy also knows their precise location. This allows him to send a soap bubble upstairs to the exact position of his opponent, stealing their sight and causing them to fall off the ledge towards Kira's veranda. We see the hint of a stand behind this stranger, and then Gappy unleashes the iconic Aura Barrage. Although we end the volume with him questioning whether or not this attacker could really be Kira after all. Actually, is it the attacker asking that question? The perfect cliffhanger for, once again, the perfect first volume of a fantastic series. And that's it. Why Jojolion's opening is perfect to me. The character introductions set up the rest of the series incredibly well, while still allowing a lot of room for growth in their identities. This setting isn't completely new, yet it's different and intriguing in its own right. The tone and atmosphere are things we've never experienced in JoJo up to this point. The first stand battle and the way that stands function by this point in the series are both extremely exciting, and it sets up most of the mysteries that our protagonist will be trying to solve throughout the rest of the part. This first volume accomplishes everything that an introduction needs to do to set up a story successfully, and there are very few criticisms that I can raise against it at all. If you're new to Jojolion, I hope this was a good, mostly spoiler-free introduction to the series, and that it got you interested in reading the rest. If you've already read it, then I hope that this was an exciting way to experience the first volume again. I wasn't really sure what to do with this video. I was originally just gonna state my points and structure each section of the video around the aspects of the opening that I thought worked well, but as I started writing, I got interested in doing this sort of chronological narrative while adding my own analysis along the way, and I thought it could be more entertaining in some ways, even if it made the video a bit longer than I had planned. I don't know, if you made it this far, maybe leave me a comment and let me know which structure you think would have been better, or if you liked this structure, then how the narrative style could be improved for next time. I'm not sure if I want to make this a series or anything, so I guess we'll just see how well this video does. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you want me to talk about next. Till then, see ya.